Christmas is literally just around the corner. I wonder whether you've got your Christmas decos up. Maybe you've started thinking about stringing up some Christmas lights that are merry and bright. They're blinking in the night. Everyone enjoys looking at them. They're beautiful. Can be a little bit distracting at times. I'm sure also a little bit annoying if you have to live across the road from someone whose house is lit up like a castle. But is it the same for our wildlife? I'm thinking probably yes. If you find it a bit bright, then how do you think it is for the possums and the fruit bats who are just trying to live their best lives at night? Well, I caught up with Euan Ritchie. He's a professor in wildlife ecology and conservation at Deakin University. He's also from the Biodiversity Council.
I don't have Christmas lights up at my house yet. I'm sure our kids are quite keen to have them up soon. We need to get a tree first. But I think one of the things we need to think about, of course, is what lights and where we put those lights as well.
I know this is the thing, right? Because, you know, this time of the year, one of the most special things to do is to go around and look at all the Christmas lights that are adorning the outsides of houses and buildings and things like that. I mean, aside from the effort that it takes to string all of these lights up for the community's benefit, I have always wondered about how those lights impact, first of all, the neighbours, and second of all, wildlife. So I guess, have you experienced your neighbours having a whole lot of Christmas lights blaring into your bedroom?
Look, absolutely. And I think, like a lot of people living in various parts of Australia, I think there's been an increase in recent years. And I can understand that, it's fun. People want to sort of embrace this time of the year, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we do need to think really carefully about how we use those lights. So as you say, we're not really affecting our neighbours in a negative way, and particularly wildlife as well. And there is research, that suggests that by having too much artificial light in areas, it really can impact wildlife in a whole range of ways. It can change how they move. So some animals are using light as a way to sort of navigate from one area to another. They can become confused and disoriented. They can think that it's actually sort of daytime rather than nighttime, and that can affect, their hormones, their physiology, their sort of overall health and condition. And so we really do need to think quite carefully about how we use lights.
So does that mean that some animals that are nocturnal might think that day and night have been switched because the light is so intense?
Yeah, it can really affect their body clocks, similar to us when we, travel to a different location and you have jet lag. One of the things, of course, that we're encouraged to do is stay in the dark and reset your body clock, right? So it's the same for animals that are nocturnal. If all of a sudden there's all this light out there, their bodies become quite confused. But there's other issues as well. As I said, they might bump into things because their eyesight is impeded, but also they might themselves be more visible. So if you're an animal that is used to being in the dark and likes being in the dark because maybe you're hiding from predators, if you're more visible all of a sudden because it's brightly lit, that puts you at risk. And it might mean a couple of things. It might mean, obviously, that you're more easily detected and get eaten, but it might also mean that particular animal chooses not to go to a certain area, so it might not feed there anymore. It might not be able to find mates and so forth in the area because it's trying to actively avoid that area that's super bright, because it realises that by doing that, it's at risk. So it's not just impacting one animal potentially or one species, but potentially, whole ecosystems and whole communities of species. So again, we really sort of need to think about the knock-on effects of these lights.
Wow. Okay. That's definitely putting a bit of a different spin on driving around the neighbourhood and having a look at all of these beautiful Christmas lights. So then, Euan, are there any species that are particularly sensitive to these lights, or is it pretty much just all animals?
Yeah, look, a whole range of species, whether it's birds, mammals, amphibians, and so forth, light will affect them in varying ways. And I think the point is, we're not sort of saying that we should ban Christmas lights altogether. People do get enjoyment from those, but maybe you have Christmas lights in your window, right? And then at a certain time you might close your curtains, or maybe you use lights that are not particularly bright. It turns out that LED lights, which are great in one way, in terms of energy usage, also tend to be quite bright and have a lot of white and blue light, which can be really problematic, much more so than, say, red lights are for wildlife and for people as well. So, how bright the lights are, where you choose to place the lights, and maybe you have a certain time where you just, say, okay, lights off now, because I've certainly driven down streets where the Christmas lights are going all night. And so there's really no relief for the animals living in that area. So, maybe you decide, okay, let's have the Christmas lights on from, dusk for a couple of hours when people might be walking around the neighbourhood, then you turn them off. So at least then the impact of that light is kind of diminished. But if it's for, several weeks leading up to Christmas and all night long, that's a different story.
It is, totally. And I mean, like I said, obviously wildlife in this conversation is first and foremost, but also just for your neighbours. Like, I just feel I could just be lit up like the MCG for the entire time. I would just be a very intense thing for people and for wildlife. You're hearing from Euan Ritchie this afternoon. He's a professor in wildlife ecology and conservation at Deakin University and also from the Biodiversity Council, having a chat to me, Jess Ong, on 105.7 ABC Radio Darwin and the Northern Territory, talking about Christmas lights. I wonder, have you got Christmas lights up? Do you love going around and looking at all the Christmas lights? It's a really fun and special thing to be able to do, but it does have an impact, especially on wildlife who are just trying to live their best lives, just trying to find some food, and the next minute Santa's blaring in their face, or Rudolph, a big shaped Rudolph, suddenly interrupting their path in trying to find some food. Euan, you mentioned that there are certain types of light that are better for animals. So the LED lights, you said, are not so good, but red lights are okay?
All LED lights, but I think, lights that are particularly white light or blue light, we know that affects animals more than, say, a dull red light does. So maybe when you're choosing colours, think about that carefully. But also just the brightness of the lights and how directed they are. So if it's kind of, flooding the whole of your driveway and your whole house, that's a lot of light. Whereas if it's a more focused light in a smaller area, then again, obviously that impact is reduced. And also having lights that don't face up into the sky. So, birds and bats are actually moving at nighttime. And if you have light that goes up into the sky, again, that can confuse them. And we even know that some of that light, depending on how strong it is and, if it's in the city, so you've got sort of a large amount of light, that can carry a long way. And so things like turtles, as an example, they also can get confused when they're hatching out from eggs on beaches by city lights. And so we need to, again, just think really carefully about how that light is directed. So if it's, again, small and it's focused maybe down towards the ground a bit more rather than up into the sky and flooding a large area, then, again, we can reduce the impact of that light. So, there are things we can do to really make it much more wildlife friendly.
And what about when it's not Christmas? I mean, I'm thinking in Central Australia, there's a really beautiful light show called Pajama. It's a big tourist draw card. It does involve a lot of light that is low to the ground as well. I mean, there are things you need to factor in as well with these tourist attractions.
Yeah, look, absolutely. We need to factor in not just light, but also sound and people. So, sometimes with some of these light shows, there's also sound associated with that. And also just the amount of traffic. So, of course, these events attract people. Obviously, that's what they aim to do. And if you have a lot of people moving through the environment, say much more than normal, we're leaving a scent in that environment. We're making noise, and animals are picking up on that. And, if animals all of a sudden think, oh, wow, there's a huge number of people here, that's, a bit scary. I don't feel comfortable with this. They might actually move away from that area. So we need to think not just about the light, but all the events, and effects associated around that particular event. So again, we're not advocating to sort of, stop all these fun things that happen.
You're not being a party pooper, don't worry.
Yeah, not at all. But think really carefully about how those events are run, maybe how long they go for, both, in terms of the day, but, how many weeks, how many months they might run for. And then, of course, what sort of stimulus are used? Is it sound? Is it light? Is it both? Yeah, think really carefully about it. And then going back to sort of Christmas decorations, there are other things we can do too. So, people can put big red bows on trees and things like that. That's always fun to do. I think, again, I would just encourage people to think really carefully about what decorations they use, because some things can break down really easily. Animals can get caught in them. So, if they have lots of bits of plastic and stuff that sort of break apart, then we're getting plastics into the environment. So just think really carefully about, what's a good sustainable choice that's not going to have a big impact on wildlife, and then we can all enjoy ourselves.
Jess Ong with you this afternoon, having a chat to Euan Ritchie. He's a professor in wildlife ecology and conservation at Deakin University and also from the Biodiversity Council, talking about how Christmas lights, those things that you and I love to go and look at with our families, how Christmas lights can have an impact on wildlife. I wonder whether it's something you've ever thought about before, maybe something to think about if you're yet to string up Christmas lights on the outside of your house and have all of those beautiful decorations up for everyone to look at, they do have impacts, especially on wildlife and the way wildlife move through the world at night. Euan, you wrote about a exhibition that was on earlier this year. I think it was an outdoor exhibition, Harry Potter and the Forbidden Forest. I think it was proposed for a wildlife conservation park in Victoria. You wrote about some of the impacts this would cause for wildlife. What ended up happening to that show? Was it moved?
Yeah, so that show was relocated nearby, but it was moved from an area that was thought to be fairly sensitive. So, you know, there was a powerful owls living in that area, and they're nocturnal species. They use calls to locate each other. And yeah, you can imagine sort of the potential impact of having, you know, huge numbers of people moving through the environment, lots of loud light, lots of sound and so forth. So there was a lot of, I guess, people in the community that were not particularly happy with that proposal where it was located. And so it was eventually moved. So that's an example, I think, and to credit to the, you know, the people of that show that they did actually at least move and they listened to community concerns. So, you know, we do need to think about, you know, if these events are they occurring in the same areas where we might have wildlife populations that are already doing it pretty tough? And we certainly don't want to add to their stress by, you know, putting all these particularly loud and shiny and bright things in the places that they call home. So
it's a real fine balance, isn't it? I mean, on one hand, you've got like entertainment and then you've also got environment, and somehow you need to kind of have that happy medium.
Absolutely. So there's always going to be sort of compromise involved. And I think, you know, luckily we are, of course, learning a lot about, you know, how species are affected by light and sound and so forth. So we can plan, therefore, in the future to make these events fun for everybody, but also to really reduce the impact on wildlife.
All right. Absolutely. Well, I mean, do you do lots of work with councils and local governments to kind of inform them of these risks, these impacts?
Look, I absolutely try and take every opportunity I can when I see sort of events proposed and so forth, outdoor events, because, you know, I think it's great that we're getting people outdoors and interacting in nature. That's brilliant. We need more of that. But yeah, we just need to do it in a sensitive way that's not affecting the very things that we are sort of out there to see and enjoy, to make sure that these events aren't causing any harm.
I remember this is very random, but after the September 11 attacks in New York, the next day everything was so quiet. I remember I listened to this podcast about just the impact that quietness, that silence had on the way that whales were moving through oceans, because finally everything had died down for them, all of the noise pollution that we just at the surface level don't really think about. But the impact, you know, something so significant like September 11 had to happen in order for us to realise that.
And COVID was the same. So when a lot of us went into lockdown because of COVID, animals actually started moving into cities around the world. There was kangaroos hopping down the main street of Adelaide. There was goats in Wales, you know, moving into a part of town, you know. So there was animals actually taking back almost, if you like, areas that they would have lived in that now, you know, deemed that they just can't use because they're too bright, they're too loud, they're too noisy. And as you say, the oceans, when ocean traffic and shipping is reduced, whales can move around more easily. So it really does show the impact that we're having on wildlife. So anything that we can do to reduce that and make cities and areas more wildlife friendly, the better.
All right. So we're not being party poopers. We're not saying don't put up Christmas lights. Just be considerate about it.
Yeah, and there's some great advice on the conversation if people want to read more about how to do this. So,
well, do you have any of those tips top of mind, Euan?
Yeah, so as I said, you know, putting your lights maybe inside your house, and you've got a front window that's facing the nature strip, you know, where people might walk past, and then you've got some curtains that you can draw and close at the right time, making sure your lights are not on all night. So maybe you have them on a timer, and maybe only have them on for a couple of hours each night. Of course, the choice of lights that we discussed, so not really big bright lights, having smaller lights and that are focused down rather than up, all of those things and other things as well can all really help to reduce the impact on wildlife. So we can still have fun, but just do it in a much more thoughtful way.
That was Euan Ritchie, who's a professor in wildlife ecology and conservation at Deakin University, also from the Biodiversity Council.